Great. So nice to see a lot of you here today, and just wanted to welcome you to this first Wealthbrite event for 2023, looking at HR trends and specifically looking at the question of how are people dealing with what we're calling the cost of living 2.0. So just to sort of give you a bit of a heads up in terms of what to expect. Sorry. My name's Carla Hoppe. I'm the founder and CEO of Wealthbrite. We're a workplace financial wellbeing company. And over the course of the conversation today, we're going to explore where we are today in the context of the cost of living crisis that has been going on for, well, at least a year, if not slightly longer. We're going to explore some of the data points that have come out of our Workplace Financial Wellbeing Report. So over the last year, we have been surveying people in work about how they are feeling about money, their behaviours and attitudes toward money, and also looking at some of the strategies they have in place for shoring up their financial wellbeing, both in terms of managing day-to-day and planning for the future. So we're going to share some of that data with you and put a spotlight on some of the, I think some of the really interesting insights that have come out of those responses. We also want to kind of talk you through what we've been learning over the course of the last year. So we're kind of building Wealthbrite in the open, being really transparent with people about how we're discovering different issues, things that have come up when we've been working with clients. And we want to put that all together and present back to you some of the lessons we've learned when it comes to building a good framework for well-being in the workplace. And lastly, we'll kind of wrap up with some of what we're doing at Wealthbrite and how you can get access to your own version of our wellbeing survey, if that's of interest to you. I should say that as we go along, I have made this an interactive session. So I am going to be asking you to answer a couple of polls as we go. So hopefully you can get online and take part. If you do have questions, I'd ask you to put them in the chat function of Zoom. If we get a chance, we'll come towards them at the end. If for whatever reason we run out of time and we haven't had a chance to respond to them, we'll pick them up after the session and make sure you get your response separately. So let's dive into what is the cost of living 2.0? Where are we today and where have we come from? I think I really wanted to focus in on what we're seeing in terms of action on the ground and the employee response to the cost of living crisis, and how that's being mirrored in HR pressures that have been reported to people like the Reward and Benefits Association for 2023. And I've mapped 4 key themes in the cost of living crisis 2.0 against these 4 areas of HR pressure. The first is, and this will not come as a surprise to anyone, but everyone is feeling the squeeze. And I think it's really important to start here. You know, just as recently as earlier this month, on 12th of January, the Money and Pension Service released data that showed that 12 million people, so 1 in 5 people in the United Kingdom, are borrowing to pay for essentials and bills. And that's a new thing for over half of those people who have responded to that survey they ran. And I think this is actually bearing out in the workplace with a huge demand and expectation around pay. And that's clearly, in terms of what's been fed back to people like Reba, the #1 HR pressure that's being reported for 2023 is managing and meeting pay expectations. And crucially, and this is something we've found in our own survey data, it's not just one population within the employee base that is struggling to make ends meet. And actually, it's the collective. So rebutting the proposition, perhaps, that it's not just the junior members of staff, or perhaps even those on sort of lower earnings that are actually really feeling this squeeze. It's hitting everyone. I think the second thing I wanted to call out in terms of where we are with the cost of living crisis is this blended effect with the Great Resignation and the fact that this still isn't over. I think people have tried to rename it or reframe it this year, whether that's the Great Reshuffle or the Great Reformation. But the data is clear that people's engagement in the workplace remains low. And I think the latest Gallup Workplace Report for 2022 showed that only 21% of people recognize themselves as being engaged at work. And this is therefore directly leading into this second HR pressure, which we're seeing, which is talent retention. And then we're seeing conscious behavioural change as a result of the cost of living crisis. And in our own workplace survey, we've seen that the top 3 actions that people are taking in response to the cost of living crisis is shopping for cheaper food, probably not a surprise to too many, cutting back in other areas of your life, and specifically that looks at things like holidays and subscriptions, and thirdly, socialising. So we're seeing people recognize that they're no longer able to make their money go as far as they used to, and they're kind of adjusting their own behavior. And I think one of the interesting things I'm starting to see when I'm working with clients is how businesses are responding to that change of behavior and the awareness of these changes in behavior when it comes to looking at how their benefits are mapped to kind of take some of the pressure off people in those places. So I have at least one client who decided at the back end of 2022 to make available food vouchers to their people in recognition of this huge pressure that was being felt around the price of everyday food. And then the last thing I wanted to flag in the context of this cost of living crisis is just the impact that is being borne out, particularly around the mental health state of people's minds, around long-term uncertainty. And of course, this is a compounding effect. It's certainly not the case. This is just as a result of the cost of living crisis. I think it's the fact that the cost of living crisis came immediately after the pandemic with a series of lockdowns. And we'll touch more on some of the data that underpins these statements in a moment, but something I'm acutely aware of in the data we have around workplace wellbeing is the manner in which money worries are expressing themselves. So in the data we have, the top 3 ways that money worries are making themselves felt for people in work was stress, anxiety, and sleepless nights. And all of that sort of comes together to create an environment where it becomes quite hard for people to be their best selves, not just at home, but also at work. So I've mapped a 4th pressure, which wasn't actually within the top 3 that Reba had, but I want to flag this 4th pressure that I think HR teams are really feeling as we go into 2023. And that's this question about how to manage long-term well-being within their employee population. So let's kind of start next thing, sorry, I keep going the wrong way, with a poll. So we're going to use Slido, so hopefully people will be fairly familiar with this process. But if you could use your phone to scan the QR code, or if you prefer, if you're on a desktop, to use the desktop site, slido.com, you can pop in this number and it will bring up a poll. And I'm going to ask you to give us some input on the question of, did your business take action in relation to the cost of living crisis in 2022? So I'm just going to flip over to the poll. I'd love to see a few people tell us what people did. There's a few options. I know some people certainly did make pay increases in line with inflation. Others just made a one-off payment. And of course, for a lot of people, as I think we're seeing being played out, none of those options were chosen, and there may be a lot of reasons for why that was. But yeah, it'd be great to see a few more answers. Thank you to everyone who's taking part. Okay, this is interesting. So we're actually seeing a majority of respondents saying that their firm took action around making pay increases. I think this is really interesting. My supposition, and I'm still testing this live with people, and I'd love to hear your feedback on the matter, but my supposition is that that may not be a trend that continues into 2023. So we're going to look at some of how we can think beyond pay and look to a financial wellbeing strategy to help you manage some of the demands that you're facing in work. So thank you for sharing that. So, as I said, this is our question for the afternoon. How can action on financial well-being help meet your goals? So if I think back to what those 3 HR pressures are, so meeting pay demands, talent retention, and then thirdly, creating a good culture and making yourselves attractive for new talent. So let's start with the first one. Show you care. Showing you care and increasing trust and loyalty. And I wanted to flag some of the data that's come out of our survey that might make you think differently about financial well-being in the course of your overall action on well-being. So when we asked people, do you agree with the general statement that your employer cares for your overall well-being? The answer was overwhelmingly yes. 71% agreed with that statement. That's great news. But when we asked them the specific question about whether they agreed that their employer was creating a positive environment to support their financial health, actually 40% of those responding said they felt either indifferent or negative about what their employer was doing. Now, for me, this kind of, it throws up a couple of questions and a couple of kind of reflections. On the one hand, employers are being recognized for the work that they do when it comes to employee well-being. But on the other hand, it seems like there's a bit of a gap between general well-being, and maybe that's other pillars of well-being, and action that's being taken specifically when it comes to financial well-being. And I guess if I reflect on the conversations I've had with clients over the last year, that probably mirrors the sentiment that I've heard from clients that says, well, we have a well-being strategy. We've done quite a lot when it comes to physical and mental well-being, but we're at the early stages of developing what we're doing in practice around financial well-being. I guess I also wanted to reflect on these numbers by saying, I think that what this general sentiment shows us and this strength of kind of trust and engagement with the business around their care for overall well-being is that business is in a unique position as a trusted source of support. So actually, if you can lean into that sort of general recognition factor by providing more in the space of financial well-being, I think it will translate into an increase in the recognition of employers as doing the right thing on financial health. And I guess, you know, if I reflect on the comparative trust levels that businesses have compared to, say, trust in other organizations that might be involved in sort of financial decisions, particularly when you think about the government, businesses are occupying a much higher degree of trust within people's minds. So that's a great starting place. So what can you do in the face and in the light of these statistics? I should say that as we go along, what I want to do is share with you some tips or some lessons we've learned from working with others in this space. And all of these things that I will share with you are ways you could look to adopt some action internally on financial well-being without necessarily having to get external support. So whether you're struggling with bandwidth or budget, these are things that perhaps you can go away and adopt internally. So the first thing when I think about, okay, so we know people like it when we do things on well-being, maybe they need a bit more on financial well-being. How can we start that conversation? I wanted to flag the concept of sharing money stories. We know money is a taboo in the United Kingdom, and I've shared this statement many times, but I'll share it again here. In the UK, statistics will show that we are more likely to talk about the details of our sex lives with our colleagues than we are to talk about the details of our bank accounts. And so there's this reticence to open up. But actually, by showcasing money stories, and particularly if you can do so by engaging with leaders to be the face of money stories, you can start to bust myths and assumptions about what good looks like when it comes to money. And I can share a couple of examples of people who have done this well. I know that Accenture in the United States have a program specifically using the faces and names of leaders in their business to be the face of money stories. So they share sort of things I wish I'd known earlier, which I think is a great way of kind of demonstrating that even if you're at the top end of your career, you may have started by not knowing an awful lot and actually recognizing that we're all on a journey. And I also have another client who this year in PR and tech who, again, off the back of an education workshop we did, their CEO took it upon himself to be really transparent in our Q&A about his own money journey and opened up in a way that I think a lot of people listening took to heart and found a lot of comfort in. So I think the power of leadership and faces and names to make the money story real is somewhere I would highly recommend as a strategy for showing that you understand and that you care in this conversation on money. So the second thing I wanted to flag here in terms of where do we go in terms of action is reducing stress, and by doing so, improving productivity in your employee base. Now, what you're seeing on the screen here is the change in responses of people when asked the question by us over the course of 2022, how often do you worry about money? And at the beginning of 2022, the average response, the average number of participants, or the number of participants, I should say, who responded to that question saying nearly all the time or all the time was 26% of people. But by the end of the year, that number had risen to 45%. And that's quite a rise in the number of people who are reflecting that they are thinking and worrying about money all the time. And I guess, what we've done on this screen is plot some of the external environment that was happening that kind of coincides with this rapid rise in sort of worries about money. And I think, I won't repeat what's on the screen, but I imagine we will all resonate with the sense of there was a lot happening outside of our control. There was a lot that was having a direct impact on our, frankly, how far our money was going. And therefore, it's probably unsurprising that people were feeling that they had an increased level of financial anxiety and stress. I guess a couple of other data points that we have in relation to the link between money and mental health that I want to just flag here, because I think it's too important a point that we're seeing in the data to ignore, are two things. One is that 93% of all respondents said that they had experienced one or more symptom of financially driven mental health in the last year. And now when we talk about symptoms, the symptoms that were offered to people to respond against were stress, anxiety, sleepless nights, lack of motivation, and depression. So almost everyone who responded to our survey over the course of last year said that at some point in the course of that last year, they had experienced one or more of those symptoms. And I think that in itself is telling me a really strong story about where people are in terms of their current state of mental health. I think in the context of work and the impact on the workplace, we actually ask people a secondary question about whether or not they agree that their money worries could impact their performance at work. And of the respondents that answered the question, 49% said yes, they believed their money worries could affect them at work. So again, I think when you put this all together, what we're seeing is action in this area is I guess, to me, it's a no-brainer, right? There is a clear cry coming from employees that they are dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety. So what can you do? And I think, the obvious starting points are to lean in to existing mental health support that you may have in work, whether that's an employee assistance program or some other form of mental health subscription that you may be making available to your people. I think it's about encouraging people to take that opportunity up to the extent they haven't already. And I guess it goes hand in hand with the culture piece, which is creating a culture and environment where people feel that it's okay to go to those sources of support, even if the source of their kind of stress and anxiety is money related. And I guess some people will have mental health first aiders. And I know that within that population, it may be possible to kind of help them open up the conversations around mental health, particularly when it comes to people's finances. So then just moving on then to the third kind of strand of action in the context of meeting these HR pressures. The third one we wanted to call out was, how can you build skills and therefore stand out from the crowd? And this is really commenting on the point around building a culture that's really good and strong and amplifying why you should be, the go-to place for new talent and really hitting that talent attraction point. And one of the things I think we need to sort of start out by saying is that, of course, in the United Kingdom, we do not receive, as standard, financial education at school, which means that we have generations of people that have entered the workforce with limited skills and experience around how to manage their money. And it's interesting because we have noticed a confidence gap or a confidence and evidence gap in the responses we've received to our survey. So what do I mean by this? So as you can see on the screen, when we ask people, how confident are you managing your money? A whopping 66% of people say, yes, I'm confident. And in fact, we give them a scale and plotted against the scale. Most people will say they are either very or extremely confident managing their money. But as we go through the survey, we dig into some of the evidence and the behaviors and actions they're taking that would go to evidence that they are indeed managing their money, in a way that would demonstrate confidence. And we've started to see a little bit of a gap, as I said. So one thing is, there's only 32% of people that report having more than 3 months of savings. Most people will be familiar with the idea that as a general rule, it's recommended that you have between 3 to 6 months of savings in cash for emergencies. Of course, that will vary depending person by person and depending on their sort of outgoings. But as I say, actually, we're seeing quite a low proportion of people actually hitting that kind of recommended level of savings. And actually, what we do see is that within the proportion that have less than 3 months of savings, actually over half of that number have less than 1 month in cash savings. So they would be less than 4 weeks away from having to turn to credit or to some other form of borrowing in order to make ends meet. So that's the first area we're seeing this little bit of gap between what people say they're good at and what they're doing in practice. The second thing, and this has come out as a recurring theme in all of the workplaces we've been engaged with over the course of the last year, is this I'm going to call it a chronic, because I do think it's a chronic lack in understanding about how pensions work in practice. So we asked everyone, do you contribute regularly to a pension? I mean, I think the statistics are something like over 95% of people saying yes to that question. But when we asked them, how confident are you understanding pensions in order to make decisions for your future? The answer is almost not at all. And I guess the other thing we've seen and started to see in the data is this coincidence between the rates of mental health concerns relating to money going up, and at the same time, we're starting to see people report that they're either reducing pension contributions to either nil or to the minimum amount. So this to me is a area that is ripe for employers to take action on. And I think, to be honest, it's a really easy one for people to do. One of the easiest places for you to start is to offer people some extra learning about how their pensions work in practice. We've been doing this with one of our professional services clients. Professional services employees are generally thought about as being, highly educated, earning lots of money. And yet actually within this group, there is this same consistent message coming out that says, I don't really know what I'm doing with my pension. I'm not really sure what I should be putting in, and I'm not really sure what I ought to be planning for. So what we're doing with them is some education workshops that will help them look at their pensions modelling tools. I suspect that if you have a workplace pension in place, which I'm sure almost all of you on the call do, you will all have access to a portal which will have great tools for modelling your inputs and outputs. These are fantastic ways to show people in real terms what it means, the difference between putting the absolute minimum versus putting in any more. You can also model what happens if I put in nothing for 5 years versus contributing throughout your whole career. So that's part of what we're going to be building into our education story. But I think it goes beyond pensions and financial resilience in the long term. When I look at what's happening between the confidence that people think they have around managing money and the gap on savings, I think there's an interesting opportunity for employers to start elevating some of those other benefits that they have in place, which cover the what if. What if I get sick? What if I have to be out of work for a while? What if something happens to me or one of my family members? And that's where we can start to talk more proactively about things like critical illness insurance, healthcare coverage, or indeed other savings mechanisms that you may have in place to help people build up that safety net in case of financial emergency. So I would really lean into your existing benefits providers to give you some additional support in this space. And I'd also be looking to signpost resources on ways people can save money. Okay, so we're going to do another poll. So hopefully you guys have kept that QR code to have, or you've kept that tab open on your phone. If not, I'll invite you again to go to slido.com and use this hashtag number. But I would love to know how you expect the business to meet pay expectations in 2023. Do you think it's realistic, or do you think it's not going to happen? We'll switch over to see answers coming through. Hopefully some of you will be able to answer that. Don't know if we've had, if people are having problems. Yes, no, okay, 50-50 so far. Yeah, okay, now we're getting a few more no's coming through. A bit half and half, all right. Okay, thank you to those who are giving your responses. So this is interesting. So roughly half of you, maybe just over half of you, think, yes, we are expecting to meet pay expectations. That's interesting. I've certainly heard in other forums much less confidence from HR professionals about being able to meet that expectation, and a sense that whilst pay may have risen in line with inflation in previous years, the business's ability to keep doing that is perhaps getting somewhat less. But thank you. So that's interesting. So what I want to explore now, and again, going back to where we were, is reflecting on those data points that we've seen and thinking about ways in which a financial wellbeing strategy can go to help you achieve your goals. How do we move beyond pay? Because even if you are meeting pay expectations, there's still going to be those underlying pressures around retention and talent attraction. So here I want to talk about the 3 C's, as we're calling them. And those 3 C's are communication, culture, and care. And when it comes to communication, this is something that we've been collaborating with a number of clients recently on. It's about, again, trying not to create something new, but building the messaging around financial well-being into your existing communications calendar. So one of our tech clients is launching a bite-sized benefits program where we'll be doing some complementary education that fits in line with their benefits cycle. So at differing points in the year, people will be allowed the option to either renew their sort of standard options and benefits, or they'll be able to pick some of those complementary additional ones. And what we're going to come along and do is talk about, well, why does X, Y, or Z benefit kind of go towards building your financial well-being and helping them understand just how these benefits work in practice. But I also think communication is about how, as HR, you can really sort of spread the mission. I think, it's absolutely recognized at my end that people are, frankly, there's a lot to do and you won't be able to do it all. And I think it's important to recognize that HR has many, many hats and many roles to play, and dealing with issues relating to pay and benefits and well-being is only one small part of that job. So how can you get others in the business who may have, really authentic, trusted voices to take part in this communication? That might be, if you have them, employee resource groups or wellbeing committees, but it's really looking at who in the business can help elevate the call to action around financial wellness and what the business is doing. Then when I turn to culture, I think, again, something I really want to share with this group is how you do not need to have all of the answers right now. So we know that the concept of financial well-being is relatively new in the workplace. What it means to be played out in practice is still being figured out by a lot of people. I'm working with some businesses in the legal sector who are looking closely at different offerings that they're basically trialing for their people. So they're going to do a series of pilot programs where they might try out coaching, they might try out a savings mechanism, they're going to try out some other forms of a sort of one-to-many learning forums as a different way of attracting people and getting them bought into this message. But actually, there's no fixed decision as yet as to what the long-term plan will be. And really people are in a sort of test and listen phase. And I think that actually can be it can be used to your advantage. I think one of the things we talked about earlier was this lack of engagement in the workplace. I would say that oftentimes when we're looking to increase engagement, it's not just about the pound values associated with the actions that's taken, but it's about how you're showing people that they're psychologically valued in the workplace. And one of the things we've seen that's worked really well is when people are really transparent about what they're doing and what they're building, and they get the employees involved in shaping that. So giving them a sense of ownership about how this is moving forward. And again, the second thing there I wanted to just mention was that, of course, whilst financial well-being is relatively new in its infancy of development, actually, we can really look at what's been done well in other well-being pillars and use them as a model for success. So again, when I think about what's been done really well on mental health and well-being, I can see how powerful it is when leaders in the business tell their stories of their own struggles and what they've learned and what they're doing now to kind of reflect on that learning journey. And that's something I would sort of encourage people, to the extent they feel willing to do so, is to try and mirror when it comes to financial well-being. And last but by no means least is the care pillar of our sort of moving beyond pay in the 3 C's. And really, care it's a standalone action, but it is also an output if you're doing communication and culture well. But I think, we need to acknowledge that this is sensitive stuff. We need to be open about the fact that this will be a journey of exploration between employer and employee about how far they want to go, how much they want to talk about, how far the employer is willing to push on this kind of issue. And frankly, how much you can do in this space, because of course, whilst you can give people information and give them access to good opportunities when it comes to taking, maybe it's pensions or other benefits, at the end of the day, it's up to the individual to make their own financial decisions. So I think, again, I think it's showing people that you've got their best interests at heart, and thinking back to that statistic that says employers are well regarded within the context of overall well-being. I think, again, showing people that you are interested and invested in finding a solution that works for both of you. Okay. So, sorry, last poll I'd love to get you to answer is, what is the hardest barrier that you think you're going to need to overcome to deliver on financial well-being in 2023? So you'll see, if you flick through to the Slido, the options you'll be given are leadership buy-in, budget, team bandwidth, and knowing what we need. So I'd love to get your sense of the issues. Really helpful for us to obviously take into account when we speak to people, like, what is it that you're most struggling with? Okay, this is interesting. So far, budget and leadership buy-in are coming out as the big ones, and rather, unsurprisingly, I think budget is the top concern. If you're forced to pick one, budget's going to be your biggest barrier. Okay. Great. Okay, thank you to those who have contributed to that poll. I'm just going to flick back now and we can explore. Okay, so in light of that reflection, how might you go about, we've talked a little bit about some of those actions that you can take without necessarily seeking out external support. I think the other areas I wanted to just flag was what we've learned along the way in the last year when it comes to building a framework for well-being. So the first thing I would say, and again, you can choose to kind of do this in a way that doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be costly at all. But I think there's lots of different angles through which business can get a handle on, firstly, understanding your people's needs. I guess if I reflect on the many conversations I've had over the last year, I think what I've definitely seen is a bit of action before knowledge in some cases. So there are some businesses that have done something on financial well-being, and oftentimes that may have looked like getting access to a learning hub or some form of other resource where there's an awful lot of information, all really good stuff, all really valuable, but they've done that perhaps before really understanding or asking their people, what is it they really need? So where are they feeling the pain points when it comes to financial well-being? And where might your action most likely have impact? So for us at Wealthbrite, one of our first sort of recommendations for people is start by understanding your people's needs. Ask and listen. And of course, you can do that through annual pulse checks, surveys, or other opportunities like a town hall. You might be able to get people to engage in that kind of conversation. And the second thing is obviously aligning actions to outcomes. I mean, this sounds like an obvious point, but I think it's interesting to reflect on the number of you that responded that leadership buy-in is still a sort of thing you need to overcome to sort of move forward in this space. And I think for me, this is where actually going back to those HR pressures, mapping what the objectives and outcomes are to how your financial wellbeing strategy is seeking to resolve those or meet those. And then, of course, there's the there's always the angle that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to financial wellbeing and the manner in which people learn, but also the needs they will have. So I was thinking about this before today, and I was reflecting on the fact that this might feel a little bit overwhelming for people to hear, like, oh my goodness, I need to have an awful lot in place and I've got to be able to, meet everyone's needs. My strong recommendation would be don't do that, or don't try to do that, because you're probably not going to be able to do it, and definitely not going to do it well. But rather, I would turn to this last point and say, start small and prove out the model. So where we've worked with clients and done this really effectively is by piloting something that we've tested before we've gone in. So asking people what they need, going to deliver something that really addresses the specific need people have, showing that there has been engagement and that people find it useful, they've taken something away, proving that model out. And then you can build upon that exercise by saying, well, that worked well. How might we replicate this, or how might we make it available to more people in our business? So, and again, acknowledging the fact that, yes, different people learn differently. You might want multimodal formats. So whether that's blogs or resources, written resources, audio, or in person, you can play about with that. You know your people better than anyone else. But I think this is, again, my sort of emphasis here would be that you need to be cognizant of this fact that one size doesn't fit all, but you don't need to have all the answers up front. This will develop over time. So that brings us to the end of our session. So the last thing I wanted to just share with you, of course, was a little bit about what we at Wealthbrite are doing. Hopefully you've had a sense of this as we've gone, but a big part of what we're doing is helping businesses design their financial wellbeing strategy, mapping that to their benefits calendar or their comms calendar internally, figuring out the best way of delivering that message within their existing frameworks. We're then also delivering tailored financial education, and it's tailored because we do run our surveys with all our clients before we take any action in the education space, so that we make sure that we're really giving them something that we know is going to speak to the things they most need. We're also building a financial coaching platform where we'll do one-to-many and one-to-one, and of course measuring impact and ROI. And this is an emerging space when it comes to well-being at work generally, but in the context of financial well-being, our survey tool is designed to act as a repeat survey, so you can measure changes in people's stated levels of confidence, their savings habits, their approach to pensions, all those good things that we marked out before. And you can actually start to tell a story of how the action you're taking around well-being is starting to influence those answers. So that brings me just to offer you, finally, for those on the call, that if you would like a copy of, if you would like to have access to our financial wellness survey, that is available for free to all businesses. You're very welcome to scan this QR code. It will ask you to fill in a few details, and we will make sure you get your own version of this survey for your people, complete with instructions, how it works, what it delivers, and how it can power your 2023 strategy. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much. I'm really appreciative of your engagement this afternoon. If you do have questions, I'm not sure if we've had any questions in the chat, Naji, but if we do have any questions and you don't want to ask them in this forum, please feel free to reach out to me on the email on the screen now, and we'd love to speak to you and answer any questions you have. But otherwise, thank you very much.